morning or good afternoon. Welcome everyone and I hope you're having a good week. Thank you for your willingness to be part of this conversation of civil society and communities in Latin America and the Caribbean region. My name is Karen Daraway. I am part of the team member of the LAC Platform. And today we are talking about the LAC Regional Act A webinar. The purpose of this webinar is to share information about the access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, the latest works of the accelerator, and some key priorities. Also, to get updates from the Act A, civil society, and community representatives, and share experiences and perspectives concerning COVID-19 tools. Let me just add more people who are in the waiting room. Also, we are sharing this webinar in our Facebook page. We are live. If you want to go back to see a presentation again, or if you know someone who couldn't be here but wants to know more about this topic, they can check back our Facebook Live and our live stream. We have 5 incredible panelists who will be sharing with us about the accelerator. We have Dr. Carolyn Gomes, who's the Act A Civil Society representative. We also have Rosemary Mburu, sorry if I said that incorrectly, who is Executive Director and Co-Lead of WACI Health, and also Platform Civil Society and Community Representative of the Act A. We have John Waters, who is the Head of Research and Monitoring and Evaluating Caribbean Vulnerable Communities Coalition. We have Javier Hourcade, who's the editor of the Latin America Key Correspondent team. And we also have Jorge Saavedra, who is the member of the Developing Countries NGO to the Global Fund and Executive Director of the AHF Global Public Health Institute. At the end, we will have about 15 minutes of questions and answers. So without any further ado, I'll give the floor to Dr. Carolyn Gomes to talk about more of this accelerator.
Hi, everyone, and such a pleasure to be here, and such thanks to LAC Platform. This is the second one. They did one in Spanish on the 9th, and this is the second one for the English-speaking Caribbean, and we're really grateful for the effort and support to inform civil society about the ACT Accelerator, and to give us an opportunity to share experiences and information. Mine is a very brief introduction because I was, in fact, one of the first civil society representatives to ACT Accelerator. So just a reminder that today, 11th of March, is exactly 1 year since the WHO declared a pandemic for COVID. That's the day when we all knew it was coming. We could see the numbers climbing, but that's the day that WHO decided to declare it a pandemic, which changes how we approach it, how we think about it, and hopefully how we deal with it. So much has changed. So much of our lives, so much of our work, so much of our activities, so much of our understandings have changed in that year. And yet, so little has in terms of global understandings, in terms of the way societies and across the globe are organized, in terms of the divisions, in terms of the challenges that we face in our work as civil society and communities. And as the pandemic was sweeping the globe, communities and civil society did what they always do. They stepped up and they stepped in to the breach. So when communities were locked down, as they very often were in the early stages of the pandemic and government's responses, it was community members who made sure that people that were in the community had food, had water, that people could go to clinic to get their medicines, and people were going to clinics to get medicines for the people they were serving. And communities, as they have been from the dawn of human history, have been the vehicle that has kept ordinary people most in their thoughts, that has done most to go beyond themselves to make sure that others had access. In too many places, governments went against human rights principles and moved forward with a pandemic response without engaging with communities and those who know what's happening on the ground. And in a different sense, the international community stepped up with the formation of Access to COVID Tools Accelerator in April of 2020. This was an initiative of the international community. I think the first person to raise it was probably the European Commission, and they brought together a number of other players, which eventually formed into a partnership which has come to be known as this Access to COVID Tools Accelerator. And we as civil society got invited in after the first discussions occurred. And we got invited in because the Global Fund Executive Director lobbied for the inclusion of civil society as the ACT Accelerator was being formed. And that's how come I got to be one of the early ones, because as a developing country NGO delegation, we were invited to participate in the discussions, and I got nominated as an interim representative to the ACTA structure as it was being formed. So I kind of have an idea of this structure from the time it was being built, and I've seen it through. I still remain on it, but with an increasingly smaller role as other civil society players have stepped up. And I've served in many different spaces. And civil society, other civil society has served in many different roles and areas, and you'll hear from some of them today. And we've seen the development of therapeutics, we've seen the development of diagnostic tools, the antigen RDTs. We've seen the development of the COVAX facility and the somewhat delayed rollout of vaccines to lower middle income and low income countries. And the ACT Accelerator partnership was formed to ensure equity in access to COVID tools to fight that pandemic, diagnostics, therapeutics, vaccines. And finally, it developed a health system connector, which is meant to link country action to all of the other things, country engagement, country training, country support for inclusion, for the rollout of the tools. And 1 year later, we kind of have to sit down and look with our experiences at the global response to the pandemic, at what we've lost, what we've perhaps gained, and what ACT is bringing and doing, and how as civil society we can be active, we can engage, we can facilitate and strengthen. Or if it is when we engage, we find it's not meeting its targets, it's not providing the access and the equity that it was set up to do, then how do we reshape the narrative so that in a post-COVID world, and I don't think we'll ever be post-COVID, I think COVID will be with us for a while. But as we move forward and as we get wider vaccine distribution, and you will hear a bit more about the challenges with that during the webinar. But as we move forward, how do we as civil society ensure that the understandings we have about the best way to deliver health equity through the engagement of communities and civil society, multi-stakeholder platforms in country and internationally, how do we get involved? How do we learn? What lessons do we learn from the past year? And how do we take this forward so that the next pandemic, and there will be more, see a better response, a less divisive response, a less challenge to human rights response that engages all of our strengths in a prepared and meaningful way. And now I'm going to just hand over and thank you all for being here to listen. going to hand over to Rosemary, who has been doing a lot of the work of engaging civil society on behalf of the ACT-A Civil Society Platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Rosemary Mburu. I'm coming to you from Nairobi. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. I work for an Africa regional advocacy organization. It's called WACI Health. We are a civil society organization that works to create the political will that is needed to end life-threatening epidemics, as well as to ensure equitable access to health services. But we're also very keen around supporting and facilitating civil society and community convenings towards a coordinated and united civil society voice and action. Karen, if you can allow me to share, I'll share a few screens. My presentation here is on behalf of what we call the platform, and it's not the LAC platform. First of all, thank you so much, LAC team, at the LAC platform, for the collaboration, for the support, and for making this possible. I'm making this presentation on behalf of the platform for civil society and community representatives on ACT-A. And Caroline had mentioned about that in terms of how civil society first came on board as interim civil society representatives. And then there was a process around coming up with permanent civil society representatives. And so we have regular check-in points to have conversations around what the key priorities are and what colleagues are hearing on the ACT-A. I don't know if you can see my slide now. Karen, is that visible?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah, so the platform is co-led by STOPAIDS, WACI Health, and GFAN, the Global Fund Advocates Network. We came together at the onset when ACT-A was set to support civil society and community convening, coming together, especially in terms of facilitating the nomination and the representation process on the ACT-A. And then now the role remains in terms of ensuring that there is a broader civil society engagement with ACT-A, civil society and community representatives. So right now, our work as the platform for civil society and community representatives focus on these two things. One is to convene and support the identified civil society and community representatives on ACT-A. There is a call every 2 weeks, the civil society and community reps meet to deliberate, to prepare, to share feedback, thoughts, reflections, and even strategize together. But also every once in a while, like every quarter, we also support in convening a broader engagement of civil society where the reps can then share their experience, their perspectives with a broader community of civil society community, but also ensure that we tap into the global collaboration by bringing the expertise in civil society and communities to inform the work of representatives in ACT-A, and also to provide a space for information sharing, consultation, and cohesive action for advocacy. There is a website with information about that hosts quite a number of ACT-A documents in terms of what the ACT-A is, what are the different goals, what are the different pillars working on. So that's a website that civil society and the communities, reps and actors can tap into in terms of updating ourselves with more information. So I will now dive into just a very quick brief on what the ACT-A. We've been conducting these regional webinars to ensure that civil society and community colleagues at the national level and the regional level are staying informed about the ACT-A and are also able to participate and to follow what is happening globally with the ACT-A. So far, we have partnered with colleagues in the Francophone region and supported a regional briefing. There has been one in Eastern Europe and Central Asia ECA region. There has been one in the Africa region, and there was the one last on Tuesday, actually this week, the LAC Spanish version, and now this LAC English version. And again, this month, there will be a second regional webinar for the Francophone region. And so the idea is that these conversations should not really stay just at the global level, but really have connect with colleagues at the regional and national level. And Carolyn has mentioned, and a lot of colleagues are aware, that the ACT-A stands for Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, ACT-A. It was launched in April 2020, so we are getting into the first anniversary of ACT-A. It was launched by WHO, the European Commission, France, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in response to a call from G20 leaders in March 2020. It is a collaboration to accelerate development, production, and equitable access to COVID-19 tests, treatments, and vaccines. It is co-convened by 9 leading global health organizations. And I think just to mention that it is not a new decision-making organization, but has been set up as a support structure to facilitate cross-cutting knowledge sharing. The diagram right here, for me, is one of the easiest diagrams I've come across to help just conceptual, or just see have a diagram that helps us to understand this particular structure. And so you have what we call the pillars, and Caroline has mentioned about those. And so we have the vaccines, or what we also call COVAX. You have the therapeutics pillar, you have health systems connector, we have diagnostics, and we also have a cross-cutting one, which is on access and allocation. And you can see here that the vaccines pillar, or COVAX, the lead agencies are Gavi and CEPI. Then you have UNITAID and Wellcome are leading on therapeutics. Then you have the World Bank and the Global Fund leading on health systems connector. Then you have, for diagnostics, you have the Global Fund again and FIND. And you have World Health Organization as one of the 9 organizations that are leading and co-convening. WHO also hosts what we call the ACT-A Hub, which helps now with the coordination of all these 9 agencies. Within that hub, there is also a civil society focal point that connects with the civil society representatives within the lead agencies, but also connects with us on the platform and the civil society and community reps that sit on the ACT-A. So that's just a quick introduction of ACT-A. And this is just a summary of that. Those are the 4 main pillars: the diagnostics, therapeutics, vaccines, health systems connector. But also there is Facilitation Council, which is important to mention, which is the highest political, I would say, political mechanism or framework of ACT-A, which provides guidance to ACT-A accelerator pillars. The ACT-A Hub, which is hosted by WHO, ensures knowledge sharing across the pillars of the ACT-A. And I think we'll see more information or another slide with Facilitation Council. So just in terms of, I think, a broad view of what are the goals of ACT-A. So across the 3 pillars, we have, for vaccines, the main goal is to ensure that the COVAX delivers 2 billion doses by the end of 2021. Then for therapeutics, the goal is on 245 million courses by mid-2021. And then in terms of diagnostics, we have 500 million tests by mid-2021. So that's just an overview of what each of the pillars is working towards. When we talk about equitable access, basically equitable allocation and access to either vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. Those are the goals of ACT-A. And one of the things or concerns that has been raised by civil society and communities, and it's an area for discussion because it could have its pros and cons, is that right now ACT-A's ambition is that it would serve and function up to the end of 2021. So there have been some critics who have said that it is not ambitious enough, that it should look beyond 2021 in terms of thinking around the long-term implications of COVID-19 on people and on health systems. But then you also have another school of thought that thinks that no, maybe ACT-A's ambition up to 2021 is sufficient, because then it means that the lead agencies, that's the Global Fund, Unitaid, Gavi, then have time to also focus on their core mandate. And so that's a discussion around to what extent should the ambition of the ACT-A be, and to what extent is helpful. So the other slides, I will skip quite a bit because the other slides and the slides will be circulated, then go in digs deeper into each of the pillars. But what I would just want to share with you is, for example, for the diagnostics pillar, we have put a slide here that helps us to know who the civil society representatives are within the diagnostics pillar. So you have a number of work streams within the diagnostics pillar, and you can then see the names of who the civil society and community reps are, their organizations in their country. For example, I know Caroline did mention her role, but you can see she's sitting on the work stream on R&D of tests and digital tools. And her affiliation is developing country NGO delegation. So for every civil society and community rep sitting on the ACT-A, you can actually get to look whether there are people in your region or in your country that you can access and have conversation with. So that's the diagnostics pillar. Then you have the therapeutics pillar, which is led by Unitaid and Wellcome Trust, and the civil society reps within this pillar are also outlined here with their names, affiliation, and country. And it's the same with the vaccines pillar. The vaccines pillar has quite a number of work streams, and so quite a lot of civil society involvement and engagement, and you can come here once again and see who those reps are. I will quickly go to the health systems connector, or the health systems pillar, right now has these representatives. So for example, we have Justin, we have Javier, we have Robin, and these are interim civil society and community reps. Right now there is a process that is looking at identifying the permanent representatives. So for all the civil society and community reps, there was a process that started with interim reps and then transitioned into a process that led to identification of permanent reps. So for the health systems connector, right now we still have the interim reps, and very soon the process will help to identify permanent reps. So I did want to mention about the Facilitation Council, which provides high-level advice and guidance to ACT-A pillars, the principals and partners, and also provides global leadership and advocacy for the initiative. The council is co-chaired by South Africa and Norway. The way, for me, I understand the Facilitation Council, or the kind of explanation that helps me to understand it better, is that it's the space that is led by countries. It's the space where you have high-level delegates from country level coming together and providing guidance, ensuring accountability. And it's been co-chaired by South Africa and Norway. So very interesting to see for civil society and community reps, or all of us as a community of civil society advocates, what role we can play if, for example, we are from South Africa or Norway. So those are some of the questions that we have at the back of our minds. In terms of membership to the Facilitation Council, you have countries that collectively represent key founding ACT-A members and donors, market shapers and regional cooperation groups. Then you have 2 WHO special envoys, you have 3 non-government partners, you have industry representatives, and you have civil society representatives. So for the civil society representatives on this Facilitation Council, we have Dr. Fifa Rahman from Health Poverty Action based in the UK, and we have Peter Owiti based in Kenya. So I then just did want to mention 2 activities that civil society and community representatives on ACT-A have engaged in. One of the entry points was early last year in June 2030, when the ACT-A was forming and taking shape. And early on, we realized that it was very important to be loud as civil society and communities in terms of asking that civil society and communities are meaningfully involved and engaged. So the first letter from the CS and community reps went out in June 2020, calling the ACT-A leadership to ensure that civil society are meaningfully involved and enabled to effectively represent their constituencies in the development and governance at every level of the ACT-A, including but not limited to the ACT-A facilitation group and across the coordination mechanisms for the 3 pillars to ensure equitable access. And so it hasn't been given that civil society and communities will be involved meaningfully, and it has taken voices, it has taken pushing, it has taken being loud to actually get to where we are with the representation, even though still it's not adequate, it's not meaningful to the extent that is desired, but there is that continued engagement and advocacy. The second entry point was actually this year in this month, when again the civil society and community reps did another letter to the lead agencies. This time, the letter was focusing on a number of asks about asking the ACT-A to be more transparent and asking for more accountability, including a mapping of decision-making in ACT-A. And these are some of the areas where civil society and community reps, or we as civil society and communities, can come in terms of accountability and getting the ACT-A to be more transparent and holding the lead agencies accountable, all the decision makers and all the stakeholders. For those of us who are coming from the Global Fund background, we know how the Global Fund model has evolved.
Excuse me. Sorry, Rosemary, can we just wrap up, because we have 3 more panelists and I don't want to cut their time too, so we can have a good Q&A section. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm going to my last slide now. Thank you, Karen. The roles for in-country regional civil society. If you are a colleague at the country level or at the regional level, what are some of the things that you can do to contribute to the advocacy? One is around raising awareness to increase access to COVID-19 tools at national and local levels through knowledge sharing and demand creation. The other one is on financing, in terms of advocating with national governments to procure and distribute tools using local resources and all available multilateral funding, lobbying the G20, the G7 countries to commit more funding to address the remaining ACT-A funding gap. There's also the technical input in terms of demanding meaningful community engagement in implementation of vaccine diagnostics and treatment rollout strategies. And the other one is on advocacy in terms of amplifying the concerns and priorities of patients, COVID long haulers, vulnerable communities, and community health workers in addressing the pandemic, and using COVID-19 as an opportunity to strengthen community and health systems to build back better. So these the quick reflections. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you so much, Rosemary and Caroline, for your presentations. I'm sorry, Rosemary, I have to interrupt your presentation, but we also have 3 more incredible panelists. Next, we have John Waters, who is the head of research of the Caribbean Vulnerable Communities Coalition, to talk about a case study. You're on mute, Jan.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my name is John Waters, and I'm with the Caribbean Vulnerable Communities Coalition. And the coalition basically is the largest coalition in the Caribbean that works with vulnerable groups that are vulnerable to HIV primarily, and in human rights throughout the Caribbean. So I think one of the features that differentiates us is that we found a way of working in the English, the French, the Dutch, and the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, and overcoming some of the language challenges that come with that. I've been asked to share some case studies. There are one case study in particular of what CVC has been doing in order to manage the COVID situation that we've all had to face. And so what I thought I would do is to talk to you a little bit about a specific communications platform that we've established. So I'm just going to try and share my my presentation. Whoops, no, that's not it. Oh, I don't seem to be able to find the presentation, but I'm not sure if you can share it, Karen.
Yeah, we can see it.
We're seeing it. It's on screen.
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Great. So essentially, what I'm going to talk about is our communications platform at CVC. And this communication platform has a series of different components. There's CVC Academy, the CVC Research, the CVC Counseling, the CVC Library, and the CVC Conferencing. And essentially, this is all hosted on a platform that's called CVC Virtual. And I think that an important feature of the work that we do at CVC is capacity building, and we have a very diverse audiences for that capacity building that range from MDs to key population groups. And traditionally, most of the training has been done face-to-face and has involved a very much a hands-on approach. And obviously, that type of training has not been possible for the last year due to the lockdown and the travel restrictions imposed by COVID-19. So I'm going to be talking mainly about this branch of the platform that we call CVC Academy. And essentially, it's involved setting up a learning management system and using software like OpenEdX and StudioX and a bunch of other tools. It's involved a steep learning curve because obviously developing online courses is very different from designing a course to be delivered face-to-face. But I think there's a series of opportunities that come with this way of working. So it's not only that there are challenges. Some of the opportunities is that it's a chance for us to to look for alternative ways of communicating that are virtual within the region. And it enables us to modernize a little bit, and use the technology at our disposal to be able to achieve that. It definitely enables us to reach larger numbers of individuals, and at least theoretically, gives individuals greater availability and accessibility. But of course, on the downside, there's a lot of challenges in the region with internet access, particularly with the populations we work with the key populations that we work with, and issues of digital literacy, and a series of other technical issues that we face. In terms of some of the tools, it really enables us to design courses that use multimedia, that use videos, that have text, that have audio, that allow for interaction and engagement of participants and ways of assessing their learning. And I think for me, one of the things that I found very helpful is that it also provides us of a way to give something that has been an ask from the community for some time, which is for some kind of recognition for the community work that they do. It's something that I've heard a lot over the years from different individuals about the fact that, often they're working at an NGO on key population issues that have acquired a lot of knowledge and experience, but they don't really have anything to show for that. So, these online modular courses permit us to partner with academic institutions and offer certification. And so, we're also able to use some of these courses as required courses in order to access funding or to for some other course. And I think it enables us to formalize and to give recognition for some of the courses that we're able to offer that's been a little bit more challenging to do in the past. So the types of courses that we've been developing are also very varied. We've been doing the traditional courses on sexuality and sexual health and HIV, but we've also developed some specific courses in response to COVID. And so we've been able to develop an emergency response course for community-based organizations, because in the region, with the hurricanes and earthquakes and various other natural disasters, there is a need for being able to involve community-based groups more in the response and the emergency responses. So by using this blended learning approach, where we have modular courses that participants are able to take within a given time frame, and it gives them the flexibility to do that, followed by strategically placed Zoom sessions, which are designed to reinforce the learning, to provide interaction between participants and with the instructor. We've found that we've been able to retain the interest of the participants. And of course, with the modular courses that people can take in their own time, you can also download the information, so you don't need to have constant access to internet to be able to do that. Certainly, it's changed our workflow for designing courses, and it's been a steep learning curve for the staff in terms of developing the concept and the workflow for developing an online course. And this slide basically outlines what we've been doing in terms of the workflow for that. And it's required us to train staff, to acquire new members of staff with expertise in multimedia design or production rather, and with e-learning course design. And so I think it's also been very valuable for us. And I think it's really, for me, challenged the notion that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for your brief presentation and your input. Now, without any further ado, I'm gonna pass the virtual microphone to Javier Hourcade, the editor of the Latin American Key Correspondent team, and asking the favor if he can be precise and concise so we can have a section of Q&A.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I will read, because since I'm not an English speaker as a native English speaker, so hopefully that's helped with the time. Kant said that it may be correct in theory, but not in practice. While the richest developed countries has accumulated surplus of stock of vaccines, they have done so regardless of the fact that the rest of the developing countries, poor and impoverished by the pandemic, with billions of people, do not have and will not have access to vaccines for months, perhaps for a couple of years. This is a profoundly immoral reality. WHO Executive Director Tedros Ghebreyesus said last week, it's understandable that you want to vaccinate health workers and the elderly or the young people in rich countries before you want to vaccinate health professionals and elderly in poor countries. Vaccinate equity and resilient building, they are the two tests of global solidarity. And he said, we have been failing obscenely. As with the public health issue, HIV, TB, malaria, cancer, sexual health and reproductive health, etc., what kills the most vulnerable groups, women and girls, or other key populations, is inequality. And the origin and source of inequality is on one hand, the concentration of wealth and the systemic corruption in our countries, as well as the persistent neocolonialist economy and health model that pose an imbalance of power. For one person to be very rich to the point of throwing up bills, perhaps 110,000 people must be poor. For countries to be rich, hundreds must remain poor and in debt. For one person to be vaccinating and for there to be 4 more doses, thousands will remain without access. Advanced purchase of vaccines by rich countries is immoral. The regulatory and commercial actions of these countries where the companies have their fiscal headquarters and production plants is immoral. Governments are requiring the private sector not to export vaccines. Many of the countries loan tens of thousands of volunteers, our countries, developing countries, loans tens of thousands of volunteers for phase 3 trials, with the promise of percentage access to the magic liquid in the syringes, and fulfill promises. On the other hand, the private sector once again demonstrated psychopathological behavior by agreeing to purchase orders that they knew they could not cover or deliver. And in the face of this realization, the governments of rich countries twisted the companies' wrist so that vaccines would not leave the country. The upper middle income countries have both more than 4 upper middle and rich countries have bought more than 4.6 million vaccines. The lower middle and lower middle income, income countries, the poor countries, have bought only 1.200 million, 1,200 millions of vaccines, almost 4 times less. That is immoral and suicidal. It's useless to fight a pandemic by vaccinating a privileged few. And the little like the variant on the Manaus, Brazil, which together with other variants could potentially emerge as in a resistance to some of the most used vaccines, it's an issue worldwide. The impact of vaccines on the future of the pandemic is not now for certain, nor it's no, it is sort of the short and medium-term role played by COVID variants and possible resistance. Therefore, vaccines equity is a public health strategy which goes beyond equity and moral. Just think of the continent of the Americas and the Caribbean. Could have a coverage in the Americas, in the North America. Canada would have a coverage of 500 percentage coverage per population. In the United States, 200%. What happened with Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Panama? Below 100%, so close to 50%. So only half of the population will have access to vaccines in the following months. And the difference between sub-regions is significant. What does all this have to do with ACTA? Well, it turned out that while the US, Canada, and most EU countries are vaccinating the world population, their own population, the immunization arm of COVAX, after mobilizing billions of dollars, has just shipped last week 12 million of vaccines to 19 poor countries, which if you divide them into equal numbers, it's about 600,000 vaccines per country. Most of the countries benefiting from the results of ACTA are generally African countries, even though, for example, Philippines received 500,000 doses. Always remember that most of the vaccines require 2 doses, which means that probably 250,000 of people in Philippines will be vaccinated by COVAX. The Philippines has a total population of 106 million people, so someone could calculate it in the chat box, the percentage of coverage of 250,000 representing 106 million population. A glass of water in an apocalyptic forest fire magnitude. COVAX can save the planet from pandemic, or it can be the instrument to distribute immunization around the world, while 80% of the vaccines stay in the north. 80% of the vaccines are in the north. I have used vaccines as an example because for now they are the only hope to put the end of the epidemic. In Latin America and the Caribbean, there are hundreds of oxygen manufacturing plants or equipment that have not been put into operation. And we see heartbreaking images of people standing in the line with their portable tubes and the needle approaching the red line. Personal protection equipment exists in most of the developed countries, and demand for its health centers is failing. While in Brazil, Venezuela, or Honduras, supermarket bags, gloves, and inadequate masks are used. Personal protective equipment is reused or is purchased out of the pocket of health professionals in Latin America and the Caribbean who don't want to die or don't want to take the virus home. However, some of the countries have made a considerable economic effort, but the companies are only providing less than they predicted and agree in those agreements. It's expected that in all the global and national spaces, there will be more than 100 representatives of civil society. Because of the epidemic, the economic resources for an activist to dedicate time to a pillar or a working group in ACTA results in an equal representation of colleagues who get sick and die for COVID in the so-called South. From those professional activists, many of them already vaccinated and working for international NGOs. And this is not a responsibility of the Northern activists or the platform or the ACTA. We should express our gratitude for their tireless dedication. However, I'm coming to an end, our responsibility as a representative of civil society occupying these spaces is to open the game to activists from the developing countries, victims of the problem we try to solve, to open the game to activists from developing countries, to ask how things are going in poor countries and not to stick to what the agencies inform us or the partners agencies or global health institution information has been produced. Demand greater transparency and accountability, denounce bureaucratic practices and not be accomplices. Link the global machinery with the reality or horizontal initiatives such as people vaccination initiative. To end, I want to remind people that Pfizer estimates to bill for COVID $30 billion in 2021, but they are not delivering in our countries because they demanded that the government put a collateral bonds, sovereign resources, and even embassies as insurance that we will pay. Moderna expect to bill around 18 billion, Johnson & Johnson 10 billion, and that's the billing. We must add how the prices of their shares in the stock market skyrocket. What will make the difference and the time of access to the vaccines will not be the international pharmaceutical industry, for which we are guinea pigs, but the quality vaccine developed and produced by 2 countries like Russia and China, which will be reproduced in India and a couple of countries in our region will make the difference. Civil society is sitting at the table, and I believe that we are the only ones who can make the difference. Let us not be overcome by egos and corporativism. And the only thing that gives us legitimacy is to channel their voice of those who do not have access to those spaces because they cannot speak English, they cannot speak themselves, they don't have the means to can solve their basis. So we should be more accountable. Finally, I would like to remind everyone that people with HIV can be vaccinated, and some of us should be vaccinated. Last week, WHO, as well as UNAIDS earlier, have issued a recommendation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Javier, for this impactful facts that you just said. And casually today, I just read that the rich nations are vaccinated 1 person every second. Meanwhile, the majority of the poorest nations are still waiting for a single dose. Well, lastly but not least, we have Jorge Saavedra, who is the member of the Development Country NGO to the Global Fund and Executive Director of the AHF Global Public Health Institute.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I don't know if we can have like a couple more minutes because I prepare something for 10 minutes. I can shrink it to 8, but I don't think I can shrink it more. So I will do my best. I'm gonna share my screen and I will try to do as fast as possible. Let me know if you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So the first slide shows that what HIV as a pandemic has been for Africa, now the Americas is the epicenter of this new COVID-19 pandemic. And fortunately, Africa is one of the less affected areas of the world until right now. That means March 2021, 1 year after the declaration of the pandemic as a pandemic by WHO. So the expectations at the initial stages were that from China, the most affected region will be Africa, but they never mentioned Latin America, which is actually the most affected region in the world. So I'm going to start by sharing some other slides. This is the accumulated cases in Latin America and the Caribbean as 2 days ago, 22 million accumulated cases of people who got infected. In terms of the incidence rate, there have been 2 waves of COVID-19 in Latin America and the Caribbean, and it looks like very soon there will be another wave after some spring break vacations or what we call it the Semana Santa, the Holy Week. Also, in the cases by region, as I already presented, the most affected region, of course, is the Americas, but inside the Americas, it is a share between the United States, who's been very affected, and Latin America as well. But I'll show you some other slides here. This is the deaths. If you see the deaths, then the Americas almost have half of the deaths of the entire world. Fortunately for Africa, they only have 3% of all the deaths. And that is very good. That's very good for Africa because it's a continent with less resources, but for several reasons that scientists are trying to explain, it has not been affected and impacted as it has been Latin America and the Caribbean. In the case of the split between the cases of the USA and Latin America, it is 55% in the US, Latin America and the Caribbean, 43%. But when you go to see the testing rates, that explains everything. There are a lot more cases in Latin America and the Caribbean that are undiagnosed because we are not doing enough testing. And that's why it looks like we have a smaller share. But in the case of deaths, that's very difficult to hide. So that means, why is it that we have more deaths if we have less cases? Either because our hospitals are terrible, worse than the US, or because we are testing less, or a combination of both, and probably it is a combination of both. So that's why when we see the deaths, yes, we are the leaders globally, Latin America and the Caribbean, in terms of deaths of COVID-19. These are the vaccinations in Latin America and the Caribbean up to yesterday. These are the doses that being applied, the total doses of vaccines being applied right now. There are 9 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. Those 9 countries, 8 of them are from the Caribbean only, that don't have access yet to any kind of vaccine, so they are not vaccinating yet. And I will say that some of these countries and some other countries that don't have yet vaccines is because they invested and trusted COVAX as the solution, as the only solution. And unfortunately, because this was said, and I'm quoting the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Honduras, and when he said to his people, I'm sorry to trust WHO that much because we invested all our coins in COVAX and we are not receiving the vaccines. We are going to try now to negotiate directly with the pharmaceutical companies. And that's bad for COVAX reasons, because COVAX made an open invitation to all countries not to negotiate directly with the pharmaceutical companies. But the first one who didn't listen to COVAX were the rich countries, because they really got into private deals with the pharmaceutical companies. And that's why, as Javier said, they are getting 80% of the vaccines right now, and they're putting limits to exports of vaccines, so the vaccines cannot be exported. And there's a huge inequality. And then some developing countries who didn't bet everything on COVAX, they started to try to get into deals with pharmaceutical companies in parallel. And those were the cases like Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, and they got vaccines very fast, not waiting. They haven't gotten anything from COVAX, but they already have vaccines because they did these negotiations that COVAX advised not to do. So it is a critical kind of thing, because COVAX was well-intentioned, but rich countries didn't care about that advice of not negotiating with pharmaceutical companies. They did. And some other developing countries did. So they are getting the vaccines, and the COVAX countries are waiting. There are some countries that are starting to get COVAX vaccines little by little, but they are kind of behind. These are the percentages of doses per 100 populations in Latin America and the Caribbean. The one that is doing the best right now is Chile, but then Barbados and Dominica, which are two Caribbean countries, later Brazil, and this is the full list. As I told you, there are 9 countries, 8 of them from Caribbean, that are not getting any vaccines at all. So this is a situation where the critique is to COVAX, not to Act A. I will just separate. I know it is the same thing, but I need to separate it in a certain way, because the point is that, as Javier Hourcade explained 2 days ago, I don't know if probably I missed it from today's presentation, there are representation of civil society in some of these mechanisms, but civil society is not represented at COVAX. It is represented as at Act A, especially on the topics that the Global Fund is represented. And that's a good thing, because the Global Fund opened the doors to civil society. And whenever the Global Fund is involved, civil society is there. Why is that? Because civil society are part of the Global Fund, as implementers, as providers, as the middle planners, as at the board level, everywhere is represented, which I think that's a reason why we should applaud the involvement of the Global Fund on COVID-19 related activities. The other thing at COVAX, they don't have representation at COVAX from Latin America. And it's the most affected region of the world by far, and they are not represented at COVAX. Then when you start to see the distribution of vaccines by COVAX, Latin America is the less favored region of the world. So it's a huge contradiction, because COVAX was supposed to be equitable access, and one understands equitable as the most needed. The most needed right now is our region. The one with the most deaths. Actually, in my country, people are dying massively. I mean, right now, more than 200,000 deaths just in 1 year is the leading cause of deaths in Mexico. 50 times as much people are dying for COVID-19 than from HIV. And I think that is the reason why our region, Latin America and the Caribbean, need to raise the voice. But sometimes governments don't raise the voice that much as we as civil society can raise the voice to fix things. I must say that this involvement of the Global Fund, there has many critics saying that it's getting distraction. But it's not the Global Fund getting distraction, it's the COVID-19 distracting everyone, especially the donors, the rich countries, and in this case, affecting and impacting Latin America. Therefore, I think we should welcome and applaud the Global Fund involvement on Act A, and we should encourage and ask and raise our voices for more involvement of civil society. Sometimes when civil society gets involved, the things are getting more equitable for all. So I will leave it right now there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jorge, and thanks to all of those who shared today for your time, your work, and your knowledge. And I know that we are past way of time, but since it is a very important and relevant topic, I want to open the floor for a few Q&As, perhaps 2 maximum. And since I don't see a specific questions on the chat box, you are invited to open your microphone if you have any questions or comments. Anyone wants to ask the questions to the panelists?
Can I just comment to one comment I just read?
Sure.
It's about the safety of these vaccines is kind of a major concern. And I think when you live in a country where you see your neighbors, your relatives, everyone dying for COVID-19, the less concern you have is if the vaccines are safe, because there have been years of trials with other things on the new technology of vaccines. And many people are right now getting the vaccine. So right now we should be grateful if we have access to the vaccine. Fortunately, I got my first shot yesterday. Did I ask what vaccine is I'm getting to get one? No, if there's a vaccine, I get it. Definitely, the vaccines are being approved right now. They are less risk of complications than getting COVID. And I'm saying it because relatives, friends, and many people I know have died. So I don't want to face that risk.
There's also a comment that say that there will be more resistance to vaccination from the Rastafari community. If anyone wants to speak on that. Oh yeah, Javier, you have your hand raised.
No, very quickly, I think that we should monitor in acceptability in certain communities. For example, some indigenous communities might have different levels of acceptability than people living in downtowns or in the capitals. Across the board, some of the small studies around acceptability are very high. People are waiting, wanting to be vaccinated. That's the bottom line. And also highlight that in the Americas, as well as other regions of the world, there is corruption. There is VIP vaccination centers where all the politicians and some people, rich people from the private sector in our countries has been moving on the front of the line. And why you have a black market or VIP vaccination centers? Because we don't have access. We learned this lesson with HIV. Thank you.
I don't know if it is a question, but Rajesh, I think it's asking if people living with HIV are safe for vaccination. And also I think Javier speaks something about this. I don't know if you want to explain more.
Very quickly, I mean, UNAIDS recommended like a couple of months ago that all people living with HIV could vaccinate despite the CD4 account or viral law. You can imagine during the pandemic, the low access to CD4 or viral law, all people with HIV could be vaccinated, especially if you put someone in the front of the road, people with comorbidities and aging with HIV must be vaccinated. Of course, for many reasons, I will not extend it, But if a person living with HIV for long enough and have some comorbidities, should be a priority person to be vaccinated. Remember that this is not inactivated live virus, etc. There is no any risk for people living with HIV. The only caveat is that if you have 20 CD4 account, your last problem is COVID probably. You need to look into your medication, etc. But the worst case scenario is that you will have less immune response from the vaccine. So please, people living with HIV and with comorbidities, push for being vaccinated in your country.
Thank you, Javier. Jorge, can you please talk more about the question of Nicole Cole? Why do we still have to wear masks if vaccines are so effective?
Yes, because right now we have a proof on the vaccine trials that people won't die if they get a vaccine, or they then won't develop severe symptoms, but there is no demonstration that they cannot transmit to others if they get it. Probably they won't have symptoms, but that doesn't mean that they won't transmit to others. So right now the recommendation is to keep wearing face masks. There will be a stage when everybody's vaccinated, or at least a big group is vaccinated, so they can meet without face masks and without that social distancing because of COVID-19, but we are not yet there. I know that the CDC in the US is recommending, okay, if the entire family of an entire population of one family, or at least they all have been vaccinated, probably they can meet without the face mask. Yeah, but those are smaller groups. If they go out to the streets, they should wear a face mask because there's still the risk there. And it hasn't been demonstrated that someone who has been vaccinated cannot transmit the virus.
We have one more question from Rajesh. How can co-infected with hepatitis C and HIV can be vaccinated? I don't understand the question. Maybe Jorge, Javier, or someone can explain this more.
I mean, you need to check depending on you have hepatitis. There is no way hepatitis C, the level of your liver response, etc. You should fight for access to hepatitis C cure, number one. But check with a doctor, check with the national program. Many people with HIV hepatitis or hepatitis and HIV are being vaccinated.
Thank you, Javier, Jorge, thank you, John, thank you, Rosemary, and thank you, Carolyn, for all your inputs and your presentations. And we are way past time, and I don't see any more questions. And I want to close this webinar with a comment that I see from Anwar Luna that says, another way to advocate will be to push governments to develop vaccines in the region. In this way, we will ensure the access for our population. I want to thank everyone, and I appreciate your time to stay over time. And I wish you a good weekend too. And you can see our live stream again if you have any more questions about this. Thank you, and I hope everyone have a good week.